Welcome back, my friends. If you are listening along in relatively real time, then this episode is coming to you 6 very short days after our first market ever. And frankly, we're still a little bit tired. But I started this podcast over 2 years ago to be real about what life is like as a self employed artist. So we are leaning into the tired reality and bringing episode number 2 of this special series, The Launch, all about Francesco and I's launch of our own ceramics business, Caraterra. It's a little bit of a misnomer, so if you missed the previous episode, which is episode number 406 in the history of the podcast, but it's the first intro of the launch, I introduced this special series in that one, so you might want to hit pause right now and pop back over to that previous episode first. And hopefully, with whatever podcast app you're listening to, it'll just roll itself right into this next episode when you're all done. Also, before I dig too deep, if you did already listen to the previous episode and it wasn't your cup of tea, don't worry. Our regular interviews are coming back next week with the lovely Julie Cloutier, and this launch series at that point will then be a little bit more interspersed with our typical interview style episodes that you're used to. Just wanted to put that out there so you know what to expect around this little slice of the podcasting world. And real quick, before we get into my post-mortem analysis of our first market, which makes that sound a little bit depressing, it was good. Good things are coming. A quick word from our sponsor, Amico.
Hi, I'm Kara, content creator and Facebook wrangler for Amico Brent, bringing you ideas and support for your creative adventures every day. This week's episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze at your local distributor. Happy glazing!
Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make the living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Ikes Gara. So let me set the scene for you a little bit on this first market, because you know that I am all about providing context around the stories that we're hearing. Our first market ever, 6 very short days ago, was a 4-hour maker's market that joins forces with a local farmer's market once a month. The farmer's market happens every single Saturday, whereas the maker's market only happens the first Saturday of the month. This was a great place for us to start, because our next market is a full weekend, 2-day event. Having this shorter day first gave us a hard deadline to have our booth designed, finalized, and built. Because, as I have quickly learned, I married a procrastinator who functions at his best under pressure. Literally. While I was doing breathing exercises to calm my heart rate down the day before the market, because we hadn't fully finished the booth furniture we were building, Francesco was literally whistling while he worked. Apparently, the opposites attract adage holds quite true in our household. So yeah, full disclosure. Do as I say, not as I do, as my dad has always told me. Well, you all know that I'm a huge planner, and I'm over here on this end of your headphones talking about preparing and planning and analyzing data and making informed decisions. Well, I'm also over here asking my husband how I might be able to help as he wraps up pots in a box to be loaded onto a trailer at 2 a.m., while our alarms are set for 5:30 a.m., so we can arrive to the farmer's market for load-in at 6:30 a.m. And yes, those are the real times. I am not exaggerating for the sake of storytelling. We got about 3 hours of sleep the night before our first market. I don't recommend it. So lesson number 1, sleep the night before your first market. Or presumably any market. Or just any night in general. It's a good life practice. Lesson number 2, if you're making your own booth furniture, like tables and shelving and the like, assume it's going to take you longer than you think and plan accordingly. In fact, in the ideal world, my wish was to have the entire booth finished at least 2 weeks before the market, so we could put the whole thing together, test it all out, lay out how we're going to showcase our pottery, and adjust accordingly. Maybe even time ourselves in the process to make sure we could set up and tear down in a reasonable amount of time, and the time we were given, more importantly. Because with only about 1 hour to set everything up for this very first show, I was very nervous about getting the booth show ready in time for an 8 a.m. start. So that's my ideal scenario. And my wish for all of you listening and your own nervous systems. It is 100% not at all what we did. While we had done a fake booth setup back in the winter in order to take photos for the market submissions, the tables we used for those photos weren't what we were actually going to bring with us for markets. And the inventory we used to fill that photo wasn't exactly what we had for this market. So the photos of our booth setup, which you can find on Instagram at Carra.Terra, that's CARRA, TERRA, that setup that you're going to see happened in its entirety for the first time at 7:55 a.m. on Saturday, July 1st. Because the market started at 8 a.m. Well, okay, I'm here to be honest. I was still fussing with it at like 8:05 as people arrived, and Francesco told me that it looked fine and just to let it go. Speaking of the booth design, the rest of this analysis on our first ever market is going to come to you thanks to questions submitted by our community members. If you've listened to any of the podcast episodes in the last year, you've more than likely heard me ramble on about my love for this special place online that we've created called the community. So I won't go on too long about that right now, just to say that thanks to some brainstorming with the members of the community, you're going to start hearing a bit more from them directly here on the podcast. Because a new added perk for our community members is the ability to submit questions directly for podcast episodes. Both for solo episodes like this one, but also moving forward for interviews with guests. I'll be sharing only with community members who I'm scheduled to interview for the podcast, and members will have the opportunity to check out that guest's work, their info online, and submit questions for me to ask during our chats. We're starting this all out with this very episode. If you want to learn more, you have the opportunity to get your own questions of podcast guests answered. You can snag a free 2-week trial of our community membership by going to makersplaybook.com/community. All right, let's get to these questions because they actually wound up organically forming a really ideal framework for reflecting on the successes and the learning curves of our first market. So question number 1 comes from Jessica. How did we make the decisions we made for our booth setup and how we interacted with customers? So let's handle booth setup first. This is a bit of a 2-part answer. And the first part is a little clarification. While this was our very first market selling ceramics together, it was not my first market ever. 14 years ago, when I started my wedding business, I booked myself full for my first ever wedding season by paying for a booth at a local wedding show. Effectively, a market. You designed your own 10x10 space. You stood there on cement for 10 hours, chatting up with people and trying to make connections with them, while also trying not to take too long because you needed to talk to as many people as reasonably possible. So the general concept wasn't totally foreign to me. And I knew from those early booth days over a decade ago that I absolutely did not want to have a singular long table set up in the front of the booth where you sit or stand behind that table and try to talk to people on the other side. I'm sorry to all of you that do that. Please don't take offense. But it's not exactly inviting. Trying to talk to other people who are passing by with a physical obstruction in between, in other words, your table, well, it isn't very welcoming. And it makes it really awkward to just say a casual, "Hey, how's it going?" to someone who's maybe slowly walking by, kind of looking at your work, but not necessarily fully invested to walk all the way up to you. And let's be honest, that's a large percentage of the people going to shows. Now, I don't want my saying this to make any of you with a long table in front of the booth feel self-conscious or like you have to totally redesign what you do. That's not what I'm saying. Showing up to a market and putting yourself out there is difficult and can be potentially very vulnerable. So if for now that table makes you comfortable enough to show up, then just keep showing up. Showing up is half the battle. But if you've been feeling a little awkward, if trying to start conversations with passerbyers is feeling weird, if you've gone to a few shows and you're feeling a little bit more comfortable, maybe consider perhaps pushing that table back into your space a little bit and standing in front or to the side of the table. Just a thought to consider, okay? So, number one, how we decided on the booth setup was in part due to this past experience of mine. We wanted to design a space in the shape of the letter U, or a horseshoe, I suppose, depending on which direction you're looking at it from. The front of the booth is mostly open, inviting and easy to walk into for multiple people at the same time, while the other three sides are where the tables or shelving or whatever type of furniture you have is located, allowing people to enter from either corner of the front and move around the booth. This is a little bit of a natural segue now to another question from one of our members, Laura. Laura writes, "I'm curious what issues you corrected in the booth with the changes you guys made before the show." So, during the winter, we had sketched out ideas for how we wanted everything set up. And Francesco, in his detail-oriented ways, digitally laid out the booth to scale, so we knew what sizes of things we needed to build. However, what fits in a booth digitally and what is comfortable for humans is not necessarily the same thing. Thanks to showing this sketch to a friend of ours, Andrew Linderman, who I actually interviewed back on episode number 319, Andrew pointed out that a couple of areas might only be comfortable for one person to move in between a shelving unit and a table, or the table and the wall next to it. And we definitely wanted our booth to be comfortable for many more people at any given time. So while we initially thought we'd build twice the number of slatted walls that you'll see in the photos over on our Instagram, which, if you haven't popped over yet, it's at cara.terra. So having just the two walls we ended up with actually worked out great for keeping the sides of our booth space open, particularly for this specific market where booths were a few feet apart from each other, allowing visitors to approach you not only from the main aisle or the front of the booth, but also from the sides. More than likely, we will be sticking with having just the two walls across the back of the booth for this very reason. Let's be honest though. It also worked out great because we clearly didn't have any more time to build any more walls. If you remember the part where I said we were still building this thing Friday afternoon for a Saturday show. The other major change was that instead of having multiple tables, we only had one and put a long set of shelves up where we had originally planned to have another slated wall with a table in front of it. Our main table stayed because it serves as a display space. Think about when you walk into a store and there's a display stopping you front and center right inside the door. It shows their newest items right there for you to see, and they're usually stuff that's never on sale. I wanted a space like that to get people's ideas going. I wanted to be able to show people that while we might have certain inventory of certain items available that day, there were also plenty of other things that we could make. And if somebody wanted to order, for example, a full dinnerware set, we could absolutely do that. So these shelves that we added instead of the table were a total last-minute decision. One, because they were faster to build than a second table, but also two, because we realized we needed a way to showcase a lot more inventory and make it easy for someone to grab what they wanted, bring it up to us to purchase. I don't know about you, but I kind of hate those shoe stores where they have like one pair of shoes on display and you have to sit down and wait for a staff member to go to the back and get your size, and then you can try them on, and then maybe you don't like them or you do like them, but they don't fit really well, so you want to try a half size up or down, so the store employee has to go back to the back of the store again to get a different size, yada, yada, yada. It's a waste of everyone's time. And it was our dream that our booth might be so busy with people interested that we wouldn't have time to be going back and forth and pulling inventory constantly. The unplanned success of these shelves that I can take no advanced planning credit for, but is definitely something we're going to keep in mind for future shows, given these are open shelves with no back panel to them. Market goers could see our work from the side as they walked down the center aisle. And they would come straight up to these shelves before they even technically walked into the booth. This definitely pulled a few key sales in. And while it won't really matter for shows where booths are more tightly packed in next to each other, it's worth it to have the option when there's more space or if we ever get a booth that's a corner location in a larger fair. And speaking of drawing customers in, back to the second half of Jessica's original question, and also a fair number of other similar questions that came in from our community members. As a refresher, Jessica had asked how we interacted with customers. And another community member, Rhiannon, also asked a similar question in terms of what different approaches we had to engaging with customers in conversation and selling without making it a hard sell. Now, you know I love these questions because you know I am all about dispelling the nasty beliefs us artists get in our heads about sales. Here's the thing. Sales, or selling to someone, it's just a conversation. All we really are trying to do is begin relationships with people. Now, not deep, meaningful, will you marry me kind of relationships, obviously, but just more casual acquaintances, maybe even friendships. For example, Francesco and I spent last summer attending a lot of these markets before we ever even applied to any of them. And side note here, this also greatly informed a lot of the decisions we made and that I'm discussing now. It's a great way for you to research to see if any market might be the right fit for you or not. But I digress. So, at one of those markets last year, there were these incredibly intricate handmade paper flowers. They might actually have been paper clay, now that I think about it. I don't quite remember because I didn't buy one. And why didn't I buy one? Because, they were really impressive. I thought about it, but ultimately I didn't. Why? Because the person working the booth was a very aggressive salesperson. And it got really awkward really quickly. But what made it awkward? Because I imagine this kind of feedback, the idea that somebody might say about one of us that they were this icky salesperson and it was really awkward, that's probably a fear that's keeping many of us from selling at a market, even if we're interested in trying in-person sales. Am I right? Obviously, that's a rhetorical question because this is an audio-only podcast and I can't see you right now, but I'm going to guess that maybe hits home for a few of you, right? So, As soon as we walked up to this booth with these delicately handmade flowers, the person immediately started listing off all sorts of information to us. They were talking at us. It was a bullet list of facts that they clearly say every single time someone walks up. How they're made, what makes them impressive, how to take care of them, etc., etc., etc. Sure, it's useful information, but I was not ready for any of it. I was still just looking. In fact, I was kind of awestruck. And that awe got ruined and pulled away into needing to listen to a bunch of features. Now, how could that situation have been handled differently by the guy in the booth? How about this instead? People walk by your booth. They slow down a little bit and clearly are taking in what you have to offer. If you're able to make eye contact, you can simply say, "Hey, how's it going?" If they appear to already be deeply analyzing what's on your shelves, you can tell they're leaning in, they're getting closer, maybe they're squinting their eyes a little bit to examine the detail of your handiwork, or in the perfect world, even picking something up to feel it. You can add in, "Let me know if you have any questions." Or even you might want to say, "We have a few other items in the back if you were looking for something in particular, or if you want a different color." Obviously, whatever is pertinent to you and what you make. Then you give them more space. They might walk away at that point. Or they might walk to another area of your booth. If they do that, if they walk to another area of your booth, because they've shown enough interest to stay, at that point you could go over to them and mention a feature. You might casually say, "Oh, by the way, everything is microwavable and dishwasher safe. Just an FYI, in case you were curious." After you mention this, they may realize they do have a question now that you've asked. They may realize they do have a question now that you've said something about a feature, and a conversation could begin. Or they might just say, "Okay, thanks," and more than likely in that tone, or not even make eye contact with you for that matter. Maybe it's a, okay. At this point, my dear maker friend, I implore you to read the room. With paying a little bit of attention to other people, we can typically tell when someone is or is not interested in talking to us. If someone is pushing the sale, it doesn't mean they're going to get more sales. But we can also maybe tell when there's an opportunity to strike up a conversation with a little bit of encouragement, and that someone might be interested enough to purchase something, but they're just a little curious, right? Let me give you a real life example from us this last weekend. There was a group of friends who walked by and hung out in the aisle in front of our booth, but never came in. They were facing our booth, and they were hanging out there for a little bit. So I said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" Now remember, I'm not behind a table at this point. I mostly stood at the front corner of our booth, where there wasn't a table or shelving or anything. So physically, I was a very natural distance to just say hi to people passing by. I didn't walk up to them in the aisle. I didn't get awkwardly close. It was just a normal distance, like if you saw a friend on the sidewalk or something like that. Now, when that group of friends just sort of nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't really say much, I didn't try to push the conversation any longer, or give them a long list of how our work is food safe and microwavable and can be put in a dishwasher and how many hours it takes to make a mug or any of that stuff. However, when another group, who I assume was maybe a mom and her 2 daughters, walked up to the outside shelving, looking at our mugs, picked up an item, set it back down, picked up another item, set it back down. Then I said, "Hey, let me know if you have any questions." They said okay, and then walked around the shelves and into our booth. At that point, they were looking at the mugs we had on the back wall, And so I walked over to the side and I said, "Oh, by the way, those hold 24 ounces of liquid. Just in case you were curious." And we all laughed together at the ridiculously large giant mug, talked about how people use Keurigs with preset ounces, etc., etc., etc. Now, does that mean that the second group bought a mug? Well, in reality, no, they didn't. They didn't buy anything. Neither group did. But the second group did take a business card. So maybe something will come of it in the future. And I'm pretty sure one of her daughters photographed our QR code and is following us on Instagram now. I believe, from 13 years of experience, so maybe believe isn't quite strong enough of a word, but anyway, I firmly believe the awkwardness of sales can be solved by simply being human. Recognize someone exists. Say hello, but don't worry about pushing it further every single time. Respond to people with the same energy they give you. The guy who picked up one of our small tumblers while chatting with his two friends, all of a seemingly similar age, maybe 30 or 40 if I had to guess, to him I jokingly said, "That works great as a rocks glass, even if it's a little bit bigger than usual. For me, my style of cocktails fits perfectly fine." We all laughed, and they walked along. The young family who came by with a little kiddo wanting to pick up that same tumbler and another kid in a stroller, to them I mentioned, well, I didn't call it a rocks glass then. I called it a juice cup, and that it would be perfectly safe if the little one used it holding two hands. It makes sense, right? I didn't have a preset spiel that I gave every single person. There ironically wasn't a sales plan that we discussed in advance. We simply let the crowds sort of dictate our behavior, while at the same time remaining outwardly energetic and upbeat, regardless of how sales were going, regardless of people's responses or reactions to our prices. And yes, this is the point in this episode where we've come to that 4-letter word that's technically more than 4 letters, but you know what I mean, pricing. Our community members had some savvy questions about pricing for our first market, and I'm sure they're going to hit home with a lot of you as well. So Rhiannon writes, now that you've tested your pricing in person, did you receive any feedback or reactions that makes you rethink that pricing? Now, to be frank, I know from enough sales conversations for photography, you always get feedback or reactions on pricing. Over the years, I've sort of built up a little bit of a thick skin for this. Sometimes it still stings, but it's not as bad as it was over a decade ago. That is an unfair advantage I had going into our first market. But it's also not a skill that is innate to who I am, by any means. I used to literally sweat having to tell someone the price of something out loud. So before I dig into this, I just want to say that if this is already making you sweat just thinking about it, I get it. However, talking about price is a skill that can be learned and practiced. I guarantee you, half the people that you think are just naturally comfortable with sales will tell you that it's actually only become that way with practice. Seriously, I dare you. Go ask them and then DM me on Instagram with what they say, because I am fascinated to know. For me, this has been a learned skill for sure. But I digress. Here is the cold, hard truth. And actually, this can be filed under a response to another question from one of our community members, our OG hype guy, Bill. He's curious about our highest of highs and our lowest of lows. So I'll get to the high point in a minute, but let's go with the bad news first. The lowest of the low. As I was finishing setting up the booth, fussing with where things were on the shelves and the like, Francesco had gone back to the car to change out of sweaty setup clothes into something less sticky. I had already done this, just to be clear, Or rather, I did the thing I think many women have skills for, which is changing clothes in public without anyone actually seeing anything. You know, I had intentionally picked out a loose dress to wear for the market, half for comfort and half because I knew I could pull it on over my t-shirt and shorts that I wore for setup and then take off the t-shirt and shorts under the dress without anyone ever seeing. I think some of you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I digress. Although I should make this a formal lesson for markets. Pack a change of clothes for after you're done setting up, particularly if it's an outdoor summer market, because you will get sweaty before anyone arrives. Anyway, back to the point. I'm finishing putting things on shelves. Francesco is gone for a minute, so I'm by myself. That's the whole point. At this time, a woman who I believe is a fellow maker, because after all, the market isn't open yet, and I haven't seen any early bird guests walk through yet. So I'm assuming she must be a fellow vendor, right? She's clearly done setting up her own stuff farther down the aisle and having a walk around to check out who's there. She comes over to the outside of the shelves. The ones I mentioned were our unplanned savvy booth design, because you can check out pieces without actually coming into the booth. She picks up a mug, looks at the price tag on the bottom, and gives something like a humph crossed with shock. I'm not quite getting the sound right. It wasn't fully a gasp, because a gasp is just a surprise. This had an upset, kind of offended sounding undertone. It was quick, so I can't entirely just describe it. And she then just set the mug down and walked away. We never even really made eye contact. I think she probably thought I didn't even know or didn't hear because I wasn't facing that direction. Mind you, this was either right before or just after. I don't entirely remember the order of events, but another woman who was absolutely another vendor because she was chatting up with other people in stalls that she clearly knew already, she just came right on up in and asked how much the mugs were. To which I told her $45 for the everyday mug, which holds 16 to 18 ounces, and $55 for the giant mug, which holds 24 ounces. She just walked away. That was the start of the morning. Now, to be fair, we also had a lovely neighbor booth mate who absolutely adored our giant mugs. She didn't buy one, but she did think they were awesome, as did her friend who came to her booth to help her later. But back to Rhiannon's original question. Did these reactions make us rethink our pricing? Frankly, no. Why? Because we've literally been selling out of the giant mug for the last 2 years on Etsy. And slowly but surely increasing the price because they sold so quickly. A year ago, they were $45. And they sold out so fast, it was clear that we could increase the price. So bit by bit, over the course of a year, we've added $1 or $2 every time we've sold out. We still sell giant mugs at a decent pace online, but also they aren't consuming every moment of our studio time. And that was particularly important. Yes, we need to sell work because we're fully self-employed, so we need to pay the bills. But we also didn't want to lose our actual enjoyment of ceramics in the process. So, what these reactions have taught me is actually that we've found our sweet spot. Somewhere between $50 and $55 for the giant mugs is ideal because people still buy them, but some people don't. And that's great. If absolutely everyone bought one without hesitation, well, that is a surefire sign, my friends, that whatever you're selling is priced too low. There should be some people that don't buy. One other related side note. I am absolutely fascinated by the fact that the item we thought we'd sell the most of, mugs, whether the normal size or the giant, actually, we hardly sold any. I have a hypothesis that perhaps it's just a natural result of it being 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's roughly 32 degrees Celsius for the whole rest of the world. So I'm guessing that no one is really thinking about buying something to hold a hot beverage when they themselves are standing there sweating. That's my hypothesis. We're going to test it out all summer, and I will let you know after the next couple of months of markets what happens. But here's the big takeaway, which, spoiler alert, I had an unfair advantage of knowing ahead of time because I have been in this situation before. People's reactions to your work, to your prices, to your booth, to your aesthetic or your style, whatever, it's not actually about you. Their reactions are a reflection of them. With pricing especially, money is relative. While $100 might be a lot of money to me, to someone making twice as much money in a salary per year as I do, maybe in their mind, $100 feels the same as when I spend $40. So when I tell you that we made $700 at our first market, that might sound like a lot of money. And don't get me wrong, we're pretty darn happy. It's great. But when I tell you that our healthcare costs us $576 a month, well, now $700 doesn't quite go as far as you might have thought, right? There will always be someone who thinks your prices are too high, no matter what price you set them at. I could have had that giant mug listed at $25, and I am sure someone would have still expected it to be $15. Because while those first two people were put off by our price for a mug, the very next thing that happened, which, while it might not be my absolute highest of the high moments, it's definitely the second best thing that happened on that day. The next thing that happened was the fact that our very first sale of the day, not even 30 minutes after the market began, was from an older gentleman who walked up, looked around, pointed at the one large blue platter that we had, and simply said, "I'd like to have that, please." Frankly, I don't even know if he lifted it off the shelf to see what the price was beforehand. So I said, kind of attempting to hide my surprise in my voice, "It's $70. Would you like to pay with cash or credit?" And he pulled out his credit card, and while we were packing it up for him, he told us about how it would be a birthday present for his daughter who was turning 40. $70. He didn't bat an eye. Money and pricing is all relative to the person. You must, my wonderful maker friend, sort out your own numbers and figure out what you need to charge, or heck, what you want to charge, presuming it's higher than your need, and do that. All we can do is work to help educate people who are interested in what we make about the value and the benefits of owning one of our pieces. From there, you have to let the chips fall as they may. And remind yourself, their reactions are not a reflection of you, your personal worth, or perhaps even the worth of what you make. Okay, let me pause here, because otherwise I'm going to go down a rabbit hole on pricing and all things financial, and I've done that already on episode 318, as well as episode 206, and my entire talk for Ceramicon, which was all about pricing. So let me just wrap up this particular topic by saying this. Some people come to markets with their wallet. Some people come to markets because their friends invited them. Some people come because they're bored and it was something to do. Some people come because they're searching for a particular thing they want to buy. No, none of these things I've just listed off have anything to do with you or your work. But it will affect their reaction to your work. Okay, since we're on the topic of sales, let's get into a little bit of data, shall we? So Jenna asked, was your top selling items what you expected them to be? Were there any surprises from customers or unexpected purchases or otherwise? And I alluded to this already, but 100% absolutely not. We definitely expected mugs to be one of the highest selling items, but also expected our lower priced items, spoon rests, bud vases, things that can be singular and standalone items that you can just buy one of and don't have to match anything else. We expected that those were the items that we'd sell the highest quantity of. You guys, we sold 2 spoon rests, but we also sold 2 of our new kitchen utensil crocks. The spoon rests are $20. The utensil holders are $55. So the beautiful surprises were that many people were comfortable spending in the $50 to $70 range. And just to point out, on items that did not involve making handles. A breath of fresh air for every single ceramicist listening. And to get into the numbers a little bit more, community member Anne had asked, how many pieces did you bring and how many got sold? Now, this will be entertaining for you all as well. And be gentle with your laughter because remember, this was our first market, so we had absolutely no idea what to expect. In other words, we brought a lot. We had roughly over 200 items, and we sold 21. At this point, we will still probably bring as much inventory as we can to future markets, just in case. Because after all, we don't want to sit there telling people something is sold out. Although I was prepared with, of course, a system to allow for people to pre-order any given item that might sell out. But hopefully by the end of the first season of markets, we'll have a little bit stronger idea of how much to bring to a 4-hour farmer's market versus a 2-day show. And at that point, I'll report back. Because man, is it a workout to unload and reload boxes of ceramics. Last but not least, our final community member question that I split up a little bit and alluded to earlier when I mentioned the lowest low and starting the day with some less than thrilling responses to our mug pricing. Our hype guy, community member Bill, also asked, what was your most rewarding experience at the market? The highest of highs. Now, I would like to preface this response with the fact that yes, it even makes me roll my eyes a little, but it is still the most honest response. Aside from the incredibly lovely gentleman who helped us perk back up with energy after the mug pricing responses by purchasing that larger platter without a moment's pause, that was my high point number 2. Because the highest of highs, most rewarding experience, frankly, was finally watching Francesco get to experience in person some truly lovely compliments from many market goers and taking this next big step towards this crazy dream of ours. Yeah, I warned you, it's cheesy. But alas, it's honest. We came up with the name Cara Terra almost 3 years ago, before we were even married. This business name is older than our legal paperwork, my friends. Needless to say, it's been a long time coming. And while we've been selling those darn giant mugs on Etsy for a while now, and while yes, we had an amazingly large 190 mug order last Christmas, which did give us both a taste of working together to fulfill a big major order, and showed me a glimpse of what future work life could be like, there was something especially exciting, albeit exhausting, about the energy of standing together side by side, in person, in a booth we designed and built ourselves. Let's just not do it on 3 hours of sleep again. Okay, amore? If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you could take just a minute to rate and review this podcast on whatever player app you are using to listen. By doing so, you help me tell the podcast algorithm robots that we exist, which in turn can help other makers find us. And since you've gone through the trouble of wiping the mud off your hands anyway, why not go ahead and take a screenshot and share it over on your Instagram stories or post it to let some maker friends know as well. Tag at the Maker's Playbook so I can share your own work with my Instagram crew while we're at it. Once again, this episode was made possible in part by our sponsor, Amico.
Hi, I'm Kara, content creator and Facebook wrangler for Amico Brent, bringing you ideas and support for your creative adventures every day. This week's episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glaze at your local distributor. Happy glazing!
Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.